So the farewell order for the battalion is written. It evokes the way we travelled together on the battlefields of Europe. It talks about the successes and the dead comrades. It ends with a thank you for your loyalty and trust and a call to remain steadfast. Signed, this is my last action as battalion commander. Officers, non-commissioned officers and privates have already been transferred to other units. Equipment and uniforms have been handed over, and the handing over of property to the intendant has been completed. Today we have January 20th. After the transfer of the last plans of minefields, I'm free. Baseman is bringing the car. Glock, Lenz and Tony are to accompany me on my last trip to Army headquarters. They get in the back. Berger stays behind. I'll pick him up as soon as I know where my new battalion is. A gloomy blanket of clouds, all in black patches, low-hanging over our heads, slowly floats to the southwest. Heavy snow is falling. A shroud of fog settles over the drifts. The sky and the earth merge into one vague whole. One can distinguish a marked trace of the road only just in front of the wheels of the car, which is struggling to get through the blizzard. Although there is no way to move apart in this snowy desert, somehow cars, sledges and guns, whole columns, squeeze by us. All of them, without exception, are moving in one direction, towards the White Houses. Yes, reinforcements will be welcome there in the city, though they are no doubt coming too late. What have these soldiers been doing until now? Where have they been hanging around before? Are they on the northern cutoff, or on the retreating western front of the cauldron? Or are they some unknown reserves altogether? These questions arise, but there is no longer any need for an answer. The interest in everything around me has waned, almost entirely gone. During the last weeks our eyes have seen so much, and our ears have heard so much, so many assumptions and prophecies have been made, and the course of the great battle, contrary to all predictions and promises, has been up to the present day so monstrously destructive to us that everyone has finally withdrawn into himself. He does only what is necessary for himself, thinks only of what he is compelled to do by service or assignment. This has become the rule. Added to this is the consciousness of imminent end, which paralyzes the will of the last, still fighting soldiers, making them indifferent to everything. They look indifferently at the tanks and occupied by the enemy rifle cells in the snow. All the same fate will not pass. They hear bursts and machine gun bursts. They listen to the radio, but all this is nonsense to them. Unimportant, it says nothing. The bitter end is inevitable. In 2 weeks we will all belong to the past. So why continue to torture ourselves with impressions that only distract and mislead? Why ask questions that no one can answer? Why finally throw yourself into the snow when you're being shot at? It's meaningless. To die today. You die today. To die tomorrow. You die tomorrow. The cue will still come. What joy to anyone that his life will last a few more days. That is why soldiers very rarely seek shelter from fire. They stand under the heaviest shelling and don't give a damn. Bombing from the air seems to have ceased to be noticed. The instinct of self-preservation is dulled. An outside observer would shake his head. He would either be amazed at our endurance under enemy fire, or he would consider us abnormal. More likely the latter, especially if he had come closer and looked into the faces on which fate had already made its imprint. In front of us is the Tatarsky Val. The passage, which in autumn was 10 meters wide, is now barricaded with blocks of ice piled on top of each other. Cars have to pass through 2 narrow roundabouts. This is to prevent Russian observers stationed on the heights around the tennis racket from casting their eyes inside the cauldron. Something is going on here. Cars are parked to the right and left of the 3-meter-high rampart, men pressed against its slopes. One raises his head and shows something to his neighbour with his hand. There are small groups standing on the road too, especially near the pass. Some captain makes a sign to me to stop and walks towards me. "Look out, Russian tanks! You can't pass here." "Where? Where are the Russian tanks?" "Here, at the Tatar rampart." Mr. Major can see for himself. I'm climbing the rampart. The wind throws handfuls of white dust in my face, but still through the veil I manage to see that there, ahead, on the steppe expanse, 50 metres away from us, something white and huge is moving. Damn it, yes, a tank, a Russian T-34 tank. More can be seen on the right. They are slowly, as if by feel, making their way across the snowy terrain, moving on, obviously in search of German troops. But they are no longer there. Neither a steel helmet nor a hand with an anti-tank grenade or an explosive charge can be seen. The wide field in front of the observation slits seems to have died out, but the tank is not content with this. It does not leave, but irons the field along and across. The infantry will surely come after the tanks. They must leave them the area where there is not a single living German. Next to me, a very young lieutenant artilleryman installs the radio, gives his only soldier instructions on how to put the antenna. Quick, 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 we have to open fire, or no pigs bother. The soldier runs and the lieutenant starts twisting the tuning knobs. To my left lay a grey-haired Major Zenitnik. Inexpressibly sad, with a bitter crease at his languid lips, he looks at the oncoming armoured force. He is no longer shouting like an artilleryman. He is calm and tired, damn tired. He knows full well, this is the end. But he has to express to someone what is eating away at his soul. And since I happen to be next to him, he turns to me. His voice trembles with an inner pain I've rarely heard. Why do I, an old man, have to endure this? Was it not enough for me in 918? Why? He's crying. With the first tear, he lost all his composure. Now the tears flow unrestrained down his stubbly cheeks. He wipes them with the sleeve of his greatcoat. His whole old body shakes, and in his broken voice he sounds the impotent bitterness of the defeats of 2 wars. 1,600. I hear again the voice of the lieutenant on my right. Behind rattles a gunshot. But what does behind mean now? Where the firing positions are now, tomorrow, probably, will be already passing the line of defence. The cauldron will be so narrow that the guns can only fire at direct fire. The gap is right in front of use. 1,800. Again the shot rumbles, and again the gap. Overflight. All battery fire, yells now a young lieutenant into the microphone, transmitting the refined coordinates. But all efforts are in vain. T-34s nonchalantly tire the terrain, and when the shells burst, they have long since been at another point. In response to our battery's shells, they turn their flat turrets toward us and point their guns. Over our heads whistles shot after shot. Sometimes the shells seem to fly just a palm away from our heads. Some of them hit the rampart in front of us, so that we are covered with shrapnel and snow. Many of those around me are sent farther on their way. Along the Tatar rampart, one by one, they walk south to the place where the flight barracks stands and the first facades of the houses of the central part of the city. Stalingrad Center can be seen. They stumble like exhausted wanderers, with their heads down like beaten dogs. Having, in fact, no purpose, they drag themselves to the ruined city only because there are cellars there, because there is warmth, because in clear weather smoke from chimneys can sometimes be seen there. Maybe they can get at least a portion of hot food there. That's what drives these men. That's what determines their route. Nothing else. No orders, no battle assignment, nothing like a consciousness of duty, much less the will to fight on. And I, too, can't stay on this patch of ground indefinitely. I must get to the army headquarters. But the road along the rampart is unfamiliar to me, and Russian tanks are walking along the highway. I force myself to get up. Into the car, direction, highway, gas. And now our high-capacity car slips through the ice barrier and rushes forward quickly. Gas, gas, full gas, more, until the tankers figure out who we are and what we want. Maybe in the fog they'll recognize us as their own. We are whizzing between the stopped T-34s. The road is flat. The speedometer shows 80 kilometers per hour. Sweat is pouring from Baseman. His big hands are frantically clutching the steering wheel. South, south, south. just to avoid getting stuck in the snow. As the others look carefully to the left and right, the danger zone is gradually being left behind. But before we can descend into the lowland, a shell bursts to our right. Russian or German, it is unknown. We are lucky. Passing small houses and snow-covered hollows, we arrive at the outskirts of the town. Overturned sidewalk, toppled masts and lamp-posts, broken streetcar cars, craters, stones in piles and separately large and small, burned capitol walls and obliquely demolished facades. All this merges into one continuous picture of destruction. Of the entire centre of the city, only a complete mess of basements and all sorts of shelters remained. Somewhere here is the command of the army. Asking, we make our way further. Field gendarmerie posts, individual officers, groups of wounded men show us the way. For the first time in weeks we see passing by more or less preserved buildings. It is already dark when we reach the Tsaritsa River. We drive down the icy road, cross the river, then climb up the mountain again. We are in the southern part of the city, Stalingrad Syud. On the map it says Minina. In this suburb, the war raged the least. The street is flanked by intact houses and lattice fences. Another half an hour passes and we reach the place. In front of us is a huge building, the so-called sanatorium. In its cellars housed the army headquarters. Paulus is out of reach. I am received by the head of the officers' department, Colonel Adam. To my report, he replies, "The sapper battalion of the 16th Panzer Division has been disbanded. It arrived too late. But he won't let me go back either. No, you'll stay here, and tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, you'll take a combat group in the south. There are very few healthy officers left. Do you want to get your things? From the flower pot? Well, I don't think you can get in there. Put that out of your mind. If you want, send your car over there. Have them deliver what you absolutely need. As of this moment, you're at the disposal of the Army Command. You may be needed at any moment. Sleep in the quartermaster's office, there's still room. It's right above us. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to the chief. Good night. Adam's leaving. And I'm standing here. I have nothing. No washcloths, no razor, no coat and warm underwear, no knife and spoon, no map of the area. Tomorrow at dawn I'll send Baseman to the flower pot to bring Berger and all the stuff. It's the only way out. I go upstairs from the cellar, and in the draughty corridor together with my 4 escorts, I look for the room in question. Is the quartermaster's department here? Jawohl! The bright lamp is drowned in clouds of cigarette smoke. It's warm, one might even say hot. At the table are 2 intendants, smoking like factory chimneys with glasses of schnapps in front of them. One of the 6 wooden bunks is occupied, a sleeping soldier stretched out on it. Yes, you're welcome to stay. The room is vacant tonight. We leave in half an hour. Do they have a cigarette for us too? Of course, Mr. Major, here's 100. And the intendant put a big red packet in my hand. Austrian Sport. I open it frantically. Everyone gets one. Baseman holds out a match. We sit down, enjoy the smoke, take a deep drag. It's been a week since we smoked our last cigarette. The troops have used up their last supply. To smoke enough, we had to go to the higher headquarters. That's 100 for nothing. I guess you can't save money here. For us, tobacco is morphine. Peace. None of us remembers anymore how we were ready to run for a miserable cigarette butt, to ask for a last puff. Tobacco in the army means everything. That's what we've been convinced of in the last few days. Tobacco is mood, tobacco is morale and will to resist. But tobacco is more than that. A few grams are worth bread, chocolate and hot food. Having 1 single pack of cigarettes, you can ease yourself on duty, ensure for yourself a shift from the post and a lighter outfit, a place by the stove. One of the intendants goes to the next room and returns with 2 packs of cigarettes, which he gives to Glock and Lenz. Everyone gets a shot of schnapps. We're satisfied. Overcoats are thrown off, bunks are distributed. We lie down and smoke to our heart's content, while the 3 former occupants of the room pack their things and prepare to leave. They want to get away. It's clear to us from the muffled words they exchange as they discuss the plan among themselves. Here they have placed a map on the table and are drawing a detailed escape route on it. Here, past this point, we must surely pass. I know an inconspicuous dugout there where we can wait out a couple of days. The woods for firewood are very close. And here, in this bowl. Damn, what's the name of this place? I can't pronounce it. I know a hut here, it's probably empty. There's a lot of chickens and geese in there, and if we're lucky, we'll get a pig too. We can replenish our supplies. What do you say, Wilhelm? Wilhelm says it's a good offer. The third joins in. Day passages are scheduled all the way to Milerovo. They put on backpacks, stuffed so full that they almost burst. Tarpaulin tightly covers bottles. The last button on their white camouflage jackets is fastened, fur hats are on, skis with bamboo poles are in their hands. Goodbye, Mr. Major. Wish us a happy journey. It will help us. The door slams shut. We are alone. Glock goes into the next room. Tony follows him. They both have good nose. Everywhere we go, they'll find something. Especially Glock, he's a master at getting and securing. He's a great organizer of small things. When there was no gasoline and all the vehicles of the division were at rest, the tanks of our battalion vehicles were filled from some unknown reserves. When almost half of the vehicles were out of service and the line of them was growing at the repair companies, he immediately found the right screw, which was just missing. He would either go straight to the box and have it in his hand in a minute, or get it the next day. I don't know where he got these jewels, which sometimes could not be obtained for any money. Whether by outfit, bargaining, bartering or finding, it did not interest me. The necessary part is there, and the motors work. That is the most important thing for me. He always felt what the moment demanded and provided everything I needed. I knew it. Mr. Major, please come here. It's worth a look. Yes, it's really worth it. It's full of jewels long gone. From 2 half-open bags, jars of canned meat and vegetables gleam. Out of the third come out packs of Belgian chocolate of 50 and 100 grams, Dutch bars in blue wrappers and round boxes labelled Coca-Cola. 2 more bags are stuffed with cigarettes. Attica, Neil, English brands, the finest varieties. Next to them lay flour tortillas, folded exactly according to the instructions, lined up in a row in the Russian way, which could feed a good 100 people. And in the farthest corner there was a battery of bottles, light and dark, flat and flat, all full of brandy, Benedictine, egg liquor, to suit every taste. This food store, reminiscent of a grocery store, speaks for itself. Army commanders issue orders that troops must economize in everything they can, ammunition, gasoline, and above all food. The order establishes a mass of different categories of food, for soldiers in the trenches, for battalion commanders, for regimental headquarters, and for those far behind. For violation of these norms and disobedience to the orders threatened with court-martial and firing squad. And not only threatened. The field gendarmerie, without any further ado, put to the wall people whose only fault was that they, giving in to the instinct of self-preservation, rushed to pick up a loaf of bread that had fallen from a car. And here, in the army headquarters, which no doubt belongs to those who are far behind in the category of food, and from whom everyone expects that he himself strictly fulfills his orders, it is here that whole stacks of what for the front has long since become a mere memory, and which is tossed as a handout in the form of paltry grams to the very people who are laying down their heads every hour. The supply men are these gentlemen who have nothing else to do but answer the telephone receiver. I'm very sorry, but we have nothing else. Don't even think of changing their lifestyle, of restricting themselves. Here they eat, drink, and smoke to their heart's content, as if there were no cauldron and no human deaths. Here no one is sent to the trenches directly from a richly laid table. No rifle volleys rattle here. Probably the field gendarmerie also has a hand in these supplies. I don't know, but they are all the same field, hand washes hand. I am convinced that checks here are very rare, that in other departments of the headquarters everything went and still goes the same way. The full staff at the breakfast table, and the thinning ranks of soldiers, whose teeth with fierceness sink into the horse meat, such are the contrasts, such is the abyss, which is becoming wider and more insurmountable. The higher headquarters and the front line. A normal sleep in a warm bed, and a minute's oblivion in a snow pit. Alcohol and melted snow instead of water. Long pants with an ironed crease, and bloody rags from head to toe. 30 degrees of heat and 30 degrees of cold. Sanatorium and workshop number 4. Life and death. 10 minutes later the fire is already crackling in the stove. In the cauldron stewing meat. Tony sets the table. Half an hour later, 5 hungry mouths are devouring the delicacies. We eat to our fill, then frantically drink from full bottles until the whole hopelessly gloomy world recedes somewhere to the side. Early in the morning, a Russian air raid demolishes part of the sanatorium. Our room is also damaged. Window panes fall out, splinters fly. 4 of my companions managed to throw themselves on the floor along the bunks, and I was wounded in the head. Blood runs down my temple. My head felt heavy, everything swirled in front of my eyes, but then fell back into place. They put a band-aid on it. Lenz always has iodine, leucoplast and bandages with him just in case. Everything would have been all right, but there was a small piece of shrapnel stuck in my skull. Nothing came of Baseman's trip to the flower pot. After the bombing, our car was left a pile of metal, lying at the very door of the building. Tony prepares to go on foot to get the necessary items. Hours and days pass. In the monotonous noise of incessant bombing, explosions, the pounding of boots on the stairs, and the rough voices of the field gendarmerie, all sense of time is lost. Besides, the windows of the cellars are boarded up and covered with sandbags, so that I have to sit almost all the time by candlelight. Repeatedly appear to the Chief of Communications of the Army. Colonel Van Hooven, talking with me, by the way, remarks, "When I was still a company commander, every non-commissioned officer who wanted to become a non-commissioned officer, we were given to solve a small tactical problem. But if such a non-commissioned officer had depicted on paper something like the Stalingrad operation, as we conducted it, he would never be a non-commissioned officer." And he never became a non-commissioned officer. That Bohemian effrayat, comes a voice from a distant dark corner. The actions of the High Command are now condemned everywhere. People are sitting already written off on this spot, one could say, alive in their own grave, and now, with their memories, words, sharp criticism, they revive their experiences, not being stingy with strong expressions. Everyone knows we cannot escape from fate. It has already caught up with us. What is left for us? Captivity? Suicide? Breakthrough? Or do we really die fighting, as it is demanded of us? But for what? For what? No one knows. And yet everyone must make a decision for himself. It is impossible to avoid it. Everyone must give himself an answer to this question and act as this answer dictates. The huge question mark hangs everywhere. You can't close your eyes to it. Not at meals, not in conversations. Tony returns, but empty-handed. During this time, the offensive wedge of Russian troops, having broken between the Tatar rampart and the flower pot, reached the outskirts of the city, thus cutting in two the remnants of the 6th Army. Berger probably held together with the doctor, whose company was nearby, so we agreed just in case. So now there are already 2 cauldrons. In the north commands Strecker, gradually retreating from the territory of the tractor factory. In a special order he tells the soldiers the bitter truth. "Farewell, my soldiers." He ends his order. These words are a recognition that the power of German arms is finally broken. German Eagle, exhausted and turned into flight, in the last convulsions flapping his wings and waiting that he is about to be shot. On January 24th, we leave sanatorium. New enemy breakthroughs in the south and the appearance of the first Russian helmets on the outskirts of Minina Force the Army Command to move to the area Stalingrad Center. The whole Army headquarters is rushing north. So are we. I've got a car of the Communications Regiment at my disposal. We loaded bread, canned goods, chocolate and cigarettes in the trunk. On Red Square, the column stops. In front of us is a huge house, the so-called department store. Here is the headquarters of the 194th Regiment, commanded by Colonel Roski. The building occupies the first echelon of the Army headquarters. We go down the sloping entrance, and here we are already standing in a poorly lit basement corridor, door after door, room after room. Roski immediately points out where we should be seated. To the left are the rooms occupied by the regimental headquarters, battalion commanders, the financial and economic department, and the infirmary. On the right is already installed radio. The neighbouring room is occupied by Colonel Van Hooven. Behind him is the owner of the house with his adjutant. At the end of the large corridor to the left hangs a tattered portiere. Behind it, a smaller corridor with several rooms. Here Paulus, the commander of the army, along with him Chief of Staff, Chief of Operations and Head of the Rear. This is probably the last place of stay of the army commander, because Red Square, the very centre of the southern cauldron. There is nowhere to go from here, except by air. I'm assigned to the Army's Chief of Communications. The dim light barely illuminates the bare walls of the room. Along the walls, shelves in 3 floors. We distribute them among ourselves, throw down our belongings. Just as I'm greeting Major Linden, the Army commander enters the room. He looks tired and exhausted, all slumped over, an old man's handshake. Good evening on entering. Good evening on leaving are the only words he utters. His whole appearance is the personification of weakness and military defeat. After the night, which we spend curled up on the shelves and covered with overcoats, I am called together with Linden to Colonel Roske. The whole of Stalingrad Zud has been surrendered. The front line now runs along the Tsaritsa River. General Wulz is in command there. Roski announces to us the order of the army headquarters. To go to this area and take command of a combat group, it was called regimental. I know what a regimental group is. They bring together all sorts of inconceivable units, give them loud names, give them splendid orders, and behind all this there is only one platonic desire, complete impotence. Mr. Colonel, you don't have to screw the balls in for me. But suddenly I hear his words. We must clearly tell ourselves we can no longer hold Stalingrad. But one thing we can still do, and this is our duty. We must give the German youth an example of soldierly heroism, unprecedented in all of world history. Let the song of the Nibelungs fade before our deeds and our sacrifices. Centuries and millennia will pass, and the name Stalingrad will forever shine like a torch. In the name of what, Mr. Colonel? I'd like to ask. To chase the East and future generations to the East again? Look at this city, Mr. Colonel. Where are all those divisions that 3 months ago stood here? Did all those soldiers, and there are a great multitude of them, die really only to give an example to their children and grandchildren? But these words remain unspoken. With the Colonel on this subject cannot talk. He is a Hitler supporter. His officers tell me that he opens every meeting with the words, "Gentlemen, you know, in the Führer's headquarters there's a huge map of the Eastern Front. One flag on it is stuck right into the bank of the Volga, and it has the number 194 on it. The Führer sees every day where our regiment stands. That's what you must think about. It's an obligation. It's useless to talk to such a man. I say, Jawohl, get into the trophy jeep and drive towards Tsaritsa, rushing through a solid fog. On the right and left stand, like ghosts, collapsed houses. The driver doesn't pay attention neither to descents and ascents, nor to heaps of rubble. The speedometer shows 60, though there is no visibility ahead for 30 metres. We are spurred on by the bursting shells of the Russian artillery, which irregularly, but in a series of volleys, hits the piles of ruins. The car creaks and cracks, shakes. We have to grasp the windshield pillar with both hands in order not to fly out. On the bends, the car tilts so that we only miraculously do not overturn. But the lieutenant at the wheel is unperturbed and confidently drives out onto a large street stretching parallel to the Tsaritsa bank. Here we are met with such a hurricane machine gun fire that I order to stop. Together with Tony, I make my way on foot to the dark spot on the other side of the sidewalk. Before us looms a silhouette that resembles the massiveness of an American skyscraper. A huge 10-story building, the roof in clouds of smoke. Shots and machine gun bursts rumble from above, mostly from the side wings stretching along the river depression. The firing is coming from south and southwest directions. Obviously, the enemy is trying to find a weak spot on the Tsaritsa riverside. Pushing between barely recognizable figures sitting on the floor in the dark corridors, I finally get to some kind of room like a gymnasium. The room is huge, the floor is strewn with sawdust, and everywhere I look there are soldiers, in groups and singly. Some of them stare at each other with an absent look, others are dozing, silent, waiting for the shift, for the alarm, for the order to act, to load, to shoot, to load again and shoot again, waiting for the end. Everything here is gloomy, dark, blurry, grey. Only in the depths are burning 2 torches attached to the wall. They throw fluctuating yellow and red glare, picking out of the darkness a circle in which several officers stand at a square table. 2 hold their helmets by the chin strap, the others have them on their heads. I step closer. On the shoulders of a fat, short officer in a leather coat standing in the centre, I notice twisted gold general's epaulettes. This must be the Wolds I'm looking for. I report that Lyndon and I are at his disposal, and then I get my assignment. Everything happens at a frantic pace. I only manage to remember the right section, the left border, this building, the right, the railroad dam, there the junction with the tank corps, 500 people, food will be delivered later. The CP is best placed in a longhouse on the street. The rest is superfluous. Now, 1-2, and here I am already moving back the way I came. A few hours later, everything is sorted out. The boundaries of my section are clear. The line of defence runs along the hill descending to the south. It is held by units that have just arrived today from other areas and are not familiar with the terrain at all. No one knows the names of the soldiers themselves. They are the wounded, sick and hungry, who were swept away by the Russian hurricane and crawled out of their cellars, and who in search of a field kitchen have unwillingly found themselves on the front line. Only here they are given food, anti-aircraft battery, construction column, 3 platoons of communications, soldiers from the division bakery. This is the backbone of our troops. For heating behind our positions, we have at our disposal cellars of collapsed houses. There's a limit to everything. That's the opinion of the doctor who was sent to us. It is a young military paramedic from Vienna. He bravely and skillfully copes with his work, but already mentally said goodbye to life. Adjutant to me appointed Captain Fricker, the same one whom I still know as adjutant to the Chief of Engineers of the Army. All this cannot and will not last long, but until the end comes, we will have to endure agonizing hours, meaningless hours. The weather has changed. When I go out to inspect our positions, I am greeted by a transparently clear winter day, the air tingling with frost. But all around there is such howling and whistling that you can't help but pull your head into your shoulders. The Russian artillery rattles and rumbles continuously, tearing the polar air with its shells. Seeking shelter behind the wall, I run to the right with field-feeble lens. We jump over small funnels, overcome piles of rubble and bricks covered with snow, slip, fall, get up, run again and catch our breath only at the wide street leading directly to the Tsaritsa. Behind the rubble of a brick wall stands a well-camouflaged howitzer. Nearby lie 2 gunners, looking south, looking out for tanks. How many shots are left? 4, Mr. Major. Don't think about it. Further. We're crossing the street in quick succession. We rush past the fallen fence, through the still-standing gate, along the lonely wall. Around us, shells are exploding, pieces of ice, clods of earth, shrapnel. But we act like recruits. We have to take cover every 100 meters, or even not to stick our noses out at all. The heavy caliber guns' volleys do not stop. Burying yourself like a mole, you wait for a direct hit, which will save you from torment forever. Toward us are 2 ammunition carriers. Their clothes are torn and covered with mud, their faces are overgrown with stubble, and there are icicles on their eyes, nose, and chin. This is roughly how fear drew us as children of the houseboy. Paying no attention to us, the 2 run on. They are driven forward by order and will. It's amazing that the bleeding stump of the 6th Army is still somehow holding on. The army is writhing in spasms of weakness, rage, and despair, like a man with a broken spine who retains full consciousness while his body gradually dies out. Lenz and I have now reached the corner of the fence and throw ourselves on the ground for a respite. The terrain in front of us is completely open, and we have to rush 150 meters. The snowy field looks like a dump. There are broken tanks and broken guns, some with overturned barrels and carriages. Nearby lie rifles, helmets, canisters, shreds of uniforms and a lot of ammunition, in ribbons and scattered, rusted, and recently abandoned. "This way, Herr Major, down the path, right up to that yellow house," Lenz shouts to me. We go up, we run. I'm ahead, he's behind me. I stumble over snow-covered corpses. Russian machine guns are pouring fire on us. Just don't pay attention. Just jump up and go on. We have to run. Barely catching my breath, I run up to the yellow wall and throw myself on the ground. In a split second, Lenz is already lying next to me. I slide the helmet from my sweaty forehead to the back of my head. There, ahead, where a wrecked truck is lying across the street, about 20 steps to the left, I can see smoke from a short pipe. That must be the cellar of an anti-aircraft battery. That's where I'm going. Now a little more, Herr Major, only 50 meters. We jump up, run to the truck through telephone masts and lamp posts, collapsed balconies and unexploded shells, over icy snowdrifts and broken sidewalk. One last dash across an unoccupied cross street, and we roll down the icy steep steps to somewhere down into the darkness. Gone are the days when we were adding to our stock of French words and the word Le Château had meanings for us. Headquarters, command post, shelter. In the cauldron, everyone is crammed together like sardines in a tin can. Our shelter is in collapsed cellars and primitive burrows in the ground. The anti-aircraft captain sits in his rather capacious room. 30 men from his battery are still here, warming themselves in the heated dungeon. One is cutting another's hair. In the corner, it turns out there's still that in the world, says the radio. In the area between the Don and Manic, sounds from the loudspeaker, German troops are advancing to the northeast. Do you think this can really save us? I'm bombarded with questions. I just shrug my shoulders. How would I know? Personally, I consider it an expansion of the Rostov bridgehead to facilitate the retreat of our troops from the Caucasus. But anti-aircraft gunners cling to this last straw. The operation was undertaken for our sake, otherwise it cannot be. At the last minute, the Führer kept his word. I don't stay long. The captain quickly packs up and the 3 of us go to the positions. We start the detour on the right, at the railway embankment 5 meters high. It, slightly bending, leads to the iron structures of the bridge over the Tsaritsa. The hand machine gun, installed here to protect the flank, is well camouflaged. Its field of fire extends far into the southern part of the city occupied by the Russians, and it dominates the terrain in front of the positions of the units of the 14th Tank Corps, located to the right. Adjacent to the left are the firing positions of the 20mm guns. Flat ravines, snowdrifts, and some planks are all that is there. Between them are scattered in small groups of riflemen. They are few in number, but the points they occupy are well chosen. The soldiers make a pretty decent impression. We may hope that here at least everything will be all right for the time being. When we have finished our detour and are returning to the CP, I look back once more at the clearly visible border with the neighbour on the right. About 50 meters from the flanking machine gun, I notice some movement towards the enemy. 2 figures, clearly outlined against the light background under cover of the embankment, are approaching the bridge. Could it be any of my soldiers? Well, this is too much. This is contrary to all instructions according to which there is nothing to do ahead. Soldiers are strictly forbidden to do so. I raise my binoculars to my eyes. Yes, that's right. 2 of them are walking calmly and unperturbed towards the Russian positions. One of them is wearing a leather coat, which means he is an officer. He has a helmet on his head and a rifle over his shoulder. He is short and stocky. Here he turns his head to the left, and suddenly I notice his epaulettes gleaming with gold. There is no doubt, a general. It seems that life is not expensive for him if he decided to walk in the neutral zone. Or is he looking for someone up ahead? And no guards, only one escort. I look at the other one. He's wearing a fur hat. That's the last thing we need. A rifle slung over his shoulder like a man on a Sunday hunt, the barrel looking away, a long overcoat. Damn it, I know him. It's Hartmann, commander of the 71st Infantry Division. Yes, that's him. So, 2 generals on a no-man's land, without notifying the commander of the area, without any guards and behaving as if on a walk. Unbelievable. I would never have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. After all, the Russians are shooting like crazy, and both of them don't even try to take cover. Yeah, they have no fear, you can tell. Or maybe they think that generals are bulletproof? I'm curious to see what they want. I stare intensely. Now they are following each other farther along the embankment. Here are another 20-25 steps. They stop. Now I recognize them well. I can see by the movement of their lips that they are exchanging a few words. One reached into his leather coat pocket and handed something to the other, but I couldn't see what. It must be a clip of ammunition, because Hartmann lifts his rifle and reloads it, and the other one does the same. Ignoring the wild shooting, they continue to talk among themselves. Not for long. Then they hold out their hands and look each other in the face. A short handshake, you can only see the movement of their hands, and both of them. No, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself. Quickly climb the embankment and stand between the rails. They lean on their rifles and stand motionless. Their overcoats and leather coats flutter in the wind. Standing like this is not going to do any good, but they continue to stand. Hartmann takes off his glove and throws it into the snow. He picks up his rifle, aims while standing, fires, reloads, and fires again. The second general fires as well. And although they are being hit with countless barrels, they are still standing at the same point, and apparently have no intention of leaving. Is not this suicide? No person in their right mind would stand like that as a target for a novice shooter. No, it's done with intent. There's no other way to explain it. Hartmann takes out a new clip, inserts it into the magazine, and at that very moment falls like a cut oak tree on its left side, rolling down the embankment. The second one jumps down and bends over his stricken comrade. With such demonstrative behaviour, it could not have been otherwise. But that, quite clearly, was their wish. I see the second general trying to help his friend. He feels Hartmann's head, chest, arms, then straightens up. He casts a glance, a very brief one, at the spot where they had just been standing, turns and walks back with a heavy gait. Probably for help. He'd probably had enough of this shooting. Obviously the driving force was Gartmann. Without him, sobered by his blood, the survivor steps back alone. What I heard about the commander of the 71st Infantry Division immediately explained this exercise in mound firing to me. Hartmann was against the continuation of a futile fight, and therefore against the command and Hitler personally. He saw a way out, but the way out led to disobedience of orders, discipline, the commander, and therefore, from his point of view, was unacceptable for a German general. To become a rebel and take on his shoulders the shame of betrayal of the oath, he was not able to. On one side, unconditional obedience, order and its fulfillment. On the other, actions contrary to consciousness and conscience, senseless sacrifice of lives and blood for which he was responsible. There is no way back ahead of the indestructible wall of the Russians, and to the sides lead two other ways, but neither of them courage to go on one of them. He did not have the courage. That's why Hartmann chose death. It was an escape from life, an attempt to break through the stone wall of despair with his head. In the evening, confirmation comes. General Hartmann has been killed. The next day, the radio choked with excitement. A German general died for the Führer, the people, and the Reich. On the front line, with a rifle in his hands. Pompous words are heard about the defence of the German fortress Stalingrad, where the general, next to a simple infantryman with a hand grenade and a spade in his hand, clings tenaciously to the last ruins of the walls of the former industrial centre on the Volga. These blurb is meant to dry the tears of the German people, who mourn their sons and watch their fate with bated breath. Premature requiem speeches are undesirable, radios the commander of the 11th Army Corps to the headquarters with murderous irony. Wait to call us finished before we're finished. At our command post is dog cold. The continuous explosions have crumbled the thin wall. An icy east wind whistles through the cracks and flapping window frames. As a rule, we are in full uniform, girded with cartridge belts, sitting at the ready at a rickety table, with the collars of our overcoats high and our hands deep in our pockets. The topic of all conversations is the same. How long can we hold out? And can we even be unblocked? Opinions are sharply divided. While we weigh the pros and cons, hordes of insects are crawling all over us. Our whole body itches. Many days, whole weeks, we don't undress, lice overpower us. The first cases of hives were reported in late fall, but at this point it doesn't matter anymore. The soldiers don't even pay attention to insect bites. We are constantly hungry. For a long time, only a piece of bread and hot water twice a day will make any body go on strike. Horse meat has become a rare jewel. Even horses that had fallen weeks ago were eaten. The wind exposed a horse's head or thigh from under the snow, and they were immediately extracted. The frozen meat was immediately separated from the bones and put into a cauldron, and the skeleton was covered with new snow. In the first days, I was still able to help my 500 soldiers at the expense of supplies brought from the sanatorium, but they quickly ran out, and hunger makes itself felt every day. That being said, our soldiers are still somewhat better off, as they receive much more food than the others. This is because, although rations for 500 men are delivered to us from evening to evening, the number of soldiers has been halved during this time, and at times only 1/10 have remained at all. And not only because some of the soldiers have been killed and others wounded and are hiding in some unknown cellars. No, the number of defectors increased. German soldiers voluntarily surrendering to the enemy. This is new, and it is so hard to believe that I cannot even realize at first. But the reports confirm this fact. Apparently, the possibility of staying alive after such a battle and then returning home is stronger than hunger and the inevitability of death, although the words honour and heroism are associated with it. However, it cannot be said that the soldiers were greatly influenced by the voice of the Moscow radio, which relentlessly repeats, "Every 7 seconds, 1 German soldier dies in Russia." Nor can it be said that they were swayed by the mere reminder, Stalingrad is a mass grave. No, the fact is that since Christmas something new has sounded in the cauldron. These are the voices of the Germans themselves, addressing us across the front line, the voices of officers who have been missing for months now, the voices of German writers and even one member of the Reichstag. His name is Ulbricht. I don't know the name, and how could I know it? I used to be so proud of standing outside politics. But what he tells us, what he repeats night after night, finds its listeners. His words, in any case, are listened to much more than the records that the Russians have been playing for the last few weeks. Russian attacks demand new casualties from us. The enemy's artillery keeps the area under fire, preventing us from taking a single step. Even to go to a waste place is as dangerous as to go on a reconnaissance battle. Death triumphs over us with ease. Death comes to us in any guise and in any form. Then it is a whistling shell of an infantry gun, then a snarling shell of a large caliber, then a howling mine, then an armoured, self-propelled vehicle, then a hungry ration, then a greedy rash or frost well below zero. Death is like that fabulous drummer that the people run after. The battle area is strewn with corpses. Green and frozen to the ground, in overcoats covered with brown bloodstains, they lie in the snow in the positions in which death has caught up with them. Some, in the trenches, leaning on the improvised bumper, patrols and scout groups, on the neutral strip, pressed to the ground. Food carriers, on the edge of the beaten path, with punctured thermoses on their backs, and next to it, the liaison, clasping a written order in his stiffened hand. It's no longer up to funeral commands. All those who can still hold a rifle in their hand are sent to the front line, and the rest are needed to deliver orders. Our right neighbour has the same worries. Major Willig, who formerly held a position in Marinovka at the first personal meeting, tells me how things are at his place. Under the former GPU prison, in a cellar securely protected from bombing and shells, the remnants of the headquarters of the corps of Seydlitz and Schliemer, the divisions of Daniels and Angen. This section of the frontier at Tsaritsa is also stubbornly defended by fragments of former front and rear units, so variegated that even the officers themselves do not know their exact composition. Ammunition is running low, there are no more heavy weapons, but while still in these half-frost-bitten, starved, stripped remnants of regiments that no longer exist, the will to resist still occasionally flares up, and in the midst of all this tragedy, a group of generals who do not know what to do, unable to make any decision and rushing from one extreme to another. I can't wait for the end. But which one? The younger staff officers are in favour of a breakthrough. They are discussing a way out of the encirclement, devouring the food supplies still available to conserve strength, and gathering the necessary armaments. These adventurist sentiments are fueled by leftover liquor. Older officers, who physically cannot bear such an operation, indulge in dreams of various ways out. Several frontline commanders ask the generals, what next? What to do now, when the headquarters are falling apart, when there is no strict leadership on the part of the army command, and there is only one answer. We will not capitulate, fight to the last bullet. In the well-heated cellars, by the light of numerous candles, they discuss point by point what to do with the wounded, what to say to the soldiers, what to do in case of a Russian attack. And here rises the corps commander and truly classically utters the crown of his wisdom. If tomorrow the Russians will go on the attack, the battle will be started and then finished. The commanders interject. Is this really said by a man who all his life wore the uniform of an officer, a general with a famous soldier's name, who gave orders that decided the fate of tens of thousands of people? Each regimental commander now acts independently. Many of them are no longer willing to throw their men into battle and take on the heavy burden of responsibility for their senseless deaths. Soldiers are quartered in cellars, distribute among them the last remnants of food. It is necessary to prepare their necessary things for the inevitable captivity. The Russians won't kill everyone, the officers think, and those who survive and someday return to Germany will still be useful to her. Such officers say to their soldiers, I will not leave you. I reject suicide or breakout. Your fate is also mine. Keep order and discipline. And after that, they decide who will stay with the wounded to the end. But the commanders of the units ahead, at the Tsarina, learn about this only from Gudfrin's, and therefore continue to stand their ground, defend and fight, and only one of the lost-heeded generals finally finds the courage to act. It's General Daniels. He wants to surrender. He draws up a written document to be handed over to the enemy. He wants to surrender with the remnants of his soldiers and proposes that until the final liquidation of the cauldron they should remain in cellars that give warmth and protection, near field kitchens that guarantee at least a modicum of life. And in conclusion, a pathetic phrase. He wants nothing for himself, personally. What greatness of soul! The document is ready. But who will deliver it to the Russians? Surrender is forbidden. Of course, the army commander must not know about it. After all, he personally, together with his staff, will be in a foolish position if his shattered army will lay down arms. Therefore, no hesitation. After all, it is a matter of life and death. But who will go there, to the Russians? Daniels himself? Oh no, that's impossible. A German general, in person. Colonel Steidl is ill, and he would be next in rank as regimental commander of Daniels' division. Finally, a major agrees to go to the Russians, with him another young officer and an interpreter, a Sonderführer. But with them must go and an older officer in rank. In the corridor of the basement, Daniels runs into the regimental commander, Boyer. "Boyer, are you in favour of stopping the fight?" "Yes." "Then go to the Russians now." Boyer agrees. He is really in favour of stopping this senseless self-suffocation and, being a man of consistency, considers it unacceptable for him to shirk this task. In a car with a white sheet fixed on a stick, they drive out to the Tsaritsa, endlessly waiting for a long time at one control, until this section of the front will not stop firing. After all, the army command gave the order to shoot at the parliamentarians, and it was ordered by the command of the very army, which until now had obeyed any order from above, and which had very few officers left in its headquarters. Even the Nachstaber himself told the commander a few days ago that he, the Nachstaber, would be much more useful to the army outside the cauldron, and therefore should fly away at the first opportunity. At last, a lull is established at the front. 4 German officers climb out of the car and down the steep slope. The colonel is holding a white flag. He, the commander of what was once one of the most glorious regiments of the German army, the Deutsche Meisters, wishes to surrender to the mercy of the victor. Many hours have passed. Dusk has long since descended. At last, the parliamentarians return. With them, 2 Russian officers. All 6 are wounded by German machine gun fire. The Germans fired in spite of the white flag, in spite of the signals, in spite of the shouts of the German officers' parliamentarians, "Cease fire." But all was in vain, because in the meantime a breakthrough had occurred. The army command had somehow learned of the intention to surrender. The result? Any unauthorized negotiations with the Russians are forbidden. In the voice of the chief of staff of the army sounded a clear threat. Daniels was afraid of his own courage. "Paulus will try to arrest me and put to the wall. Now he is probably already radiating to the Führer's headquarters. Hitler will subject my family to reprisals. My poor wife and children. I haven't even seen the youngest one yet." He wails with tears in his eyes, completely losing his temper. What am I to do now? The Russian officers are informed that due to changes in the chain of command, it is necessary to inform several higher officers in order not to jeopardize the whole affair. Before Daniels goes to bed, he asks Boyer to post a guard for the night. He is afraid lest he be arrested by army headquarters. The next day the Russians do not attack, and Daniels is not arrested. The meetings continue. Frontline commanders arrive, asking for instructions. Again contacted by telephone with the army headquarters. Word of mouth reports that the Chief of Staff as if said, in view of the fact that many officers, as ordered, committed suicide, and others see it as a last resort, the surrender is out of the question. There is no possibility for it is necessary to fight to the last cartridge. So in this devil's cauldron there was room for farce with pathetic and meaningless phrases. Around noon, a ghost-like army commander suddenly appears in the building. He's looking for the generals. Negotiations on surrender are unacceptable. This is the theme of his speech. But he does not indicate a way out, and he does not want to command the army either. Besides, command is only an illusion. The ring is getting narrower and narrower. Tens of thousands of wounded are lying without any care in ruins, cellars, dugouts, or perish from the merciless frost. But the army command shows no compassion for them. is not horrified by this nightmare surrounding him, and in the midst of the apocalyptic bacchanalia of annihilation remains cold, heartless, and inexorable. After all of Willig's account, I am becoming quite fearful that a crisis is brewing on our right. Almost daily changes in command. One commands Schleimer, the other Daniels, one is wounded, and the other is not in the mood, increase the possibility of all sorts of surprises that could come at us from the right flank. On the way back, oriented in the situation at the commander of the anti-aircraft battery, and ordered him to be especially attentive to our right flank. January 28th, for variety again, tank alarm. Jumping out with Tony on the big street. From the Tsaritsa riverbed, one after the other, climb up two T-34s, one after the other, about 200 metres from a multi-storey building. If they continue on the same course, they will inevitably come right at our howitzer. With its 4 shells, it could hit both of them. I'm rushing to the right. The howitzer is still standing there, but lonely, abandoned, no gunners. I call out. Tony runs into a nearby dugout. They're nowhere to be found. What a surprise! They must have defected to the Russians. In front of us is already rumbling. The first tank is already some 30 metres away. The second one is not lagging behind it. They're both firing from the get-go. I see 2 soldiers falling, who ran out of the house opposite. The tanks are approaching the street at a rapid pace without a single shot from our side. A momentary stop, a turn, and here is a tank rushing in the direction of the railroad embankment to the overpass. Now it's the turn of the second one. He has obviously noticed us, because he fires several machine gun bursts at us. We can't mess with him and have to get away. At the worst, we will be left with only one means of defence, a white handkerchief and still surviving hands raised up in surrender. Isn't the defecting gunners the right thing to do? January 29th. Comes what I had been waiting for 2 days. The 14th Panzer Corps capitulates. As soon as I learn about it, I rush to the railroad embankment, followed by Glock, Tony and Baseman, followed by the commander of the anti-aircraft battery. The area on the other side of the overpass, hitherto deserted, is now lively. From all the holes and cellars, from windows and doors, appear soldiers. They rise from behind every snowbank. Groups form, large and small crowds. They carry carbines, pistols, machine guns to one place. They pack their belongings. Some soldiers clap each other on the shoulder or shake hands. And the victors walk between them in their fur coats and cotton coats with automatic rifles hanging aslant on their chests or taken at the ready. Columns are formed. Here all of them are 4 in a row. Everything in the world is mixed up here. Infantry, tankers, aviation, different ranks, overcoats and mascalats, soldiers old and young, high and low, straightened and bent, without things and with satchels on their backs, helmets, caps and caps. Suddenly 6 shots rang out from afar. There, in the line-up of the companies, a number of soldiers fall. What a mad dazzle! The Germans are shooting at the Germans, only because there is an order to open fire on the defectors. I send Glock to stop this killing immediately. Now I am deliberately acting contrary to the order, hindering its execution, and a minute later I am giving orders dictated by the spirit of the same order. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, but perhaps I'm not the only one. Defeat and surrender have not yet been taught to us in the Wehrmacht, neither on the plazas nor in sandboxes. Now we have a flank hanging in the air on our right. We need to set up a cut-off position. From a military point of view it's clear, but with our forces it's impossible. We must take one squad from the anti-aircraft battery and turn at the embankment with the front to the west. I have no other forces at my disposal. Anything beyond that is up to the Army Command. Let it act on its own now, one way or the other. We already know in advance the decision that will be made up there, to fight on, to hold the new position at all costs. Major Dobakau, battalion commander of the Roska Regiment, has received orders from the Army Command to take a new front line along the railroad embankment. There are defending only a few sick and a few more soldiers who were not taken to the infirmary for lack of space. The rest, The Major will have to search the cellars himself. We are no better off with the replenishment needed to hold our positions. We are also being told to utilize some uncommitted manpower reserves. Around noon, I go down with Lenz to the first basement behind us. The elongated building is about 50 meters behind us. A sepulchral silence reigns down here, and yet there must be people here. I swing open the door. A bright room. The snow outside through the dirty window panes casts a glow on a few dozen men sleeping on the floor in their grey sweaters or unbuttoned uniforms. Straw, unplanked boards, and doors pulled off their hinges serve as their beds. I recognise a lieutenant of about 30 years of age among them by his epaulette, which is torn off and held on only by one button. Unwashed blonde strands falling over his face, his hair in wild disorder over his frostbitten ears. He raises himself on an elbow. "What are you doing here?" I ask. He doesn't answer anything at first. His half-open, staring eyes stare dumbly at me. Instead of answering, he turns his right shoulder toward me. A stump in place of an arm, the sleeve of his sweater empty. A cripple. In answer to my questions, I learn he is 20 years old, has been down here for 4 days now, and has only eaten once since. It was on the last night. 2 soldiers found the dropped food and dragged it down here. The sausage, bread, and canned goods were immediately divided up and immediately eaten. Not a single person cares for them. All the soldiers here are wounded. In the next room it is absolutely the same. I am answered with mad laughter, restrained rage, bursts of anger, or no answer at all, depending on my condition and temperament. There is no one here who doesn't have at least one wound that would normally send him to the hospital. "And that one over there?" I point to one soldier lying motionless. "He died yesterday." The speaker looks at me as if it goes without saying, lying on the corpses of his comrades. So here it is, our reserve regiment, here it is, the inexhaustible reserve of the 6th Army. These soldiers, too, once marched with us in the ranks, fought with us. Now they have neither health nor dignity left, and I must beckon them to the front line with the promise of hot soup only so that they may find their end sooner, and we ourselves may postpone, perhaps for a day, our imminent doom. In the afternoon I send a report of the lack of men and ask for reinforcements. It is urgently needed, as the new front line is still not fixed. Perhaps a major Russian attack from the west will follow early in the morning, and this flank attack will overturn us. That's why I'm sending out a 6-man reconnaissance team. I want to know what's happening on my right. But before I know it, harsh reality foils all intentions and combinations. Suddenly, 6 T-34s appear in front of the neighbouring building, where Wools's command post was located until recently. 2 take up position on the corners, and 2 drive into the courtyard. The infantry sitting on them jumps off, and the tank guns are already pounding the ruined wall, so that shells burst on the other side of it. One episode further tightens the natural course of events. At the entrance to the courtyard appears Wultz with his staff of 5 men. Each holds a carbine, each with a single clip. 30 shots are fired quickly. With uncovered head and as calmly as he appeared, the general disappears again into the building, the others after him. No one can even lift a finger to save the commander of our southern front, as the Russian tanks do not allow to move. Finally, the firing in the immediate vicinity subsides. 2 Russians follow Wulz, and after a few minutes bring him outside. He is shown a place on the armour of the tank, Put, and his luggage. Then the whole tank column goes westward. From this we made a conclusion for ourselves. It is too conspicuous to set up a CP right on the street, so we move our CP. We are located in a huge building with 2 wings. This is the so-called hunting park. Here, though with a great delay, I receive a report from the sent reconnaissance group. Only 2 out of 6 have returned, but both of them shining with joy and carrying bread in their hands and under their arms. 20 kilograms, I quickly estimate. One reports, "The Russians captured us near the prison. But they did nothing to us. On the contrary, the men turned out to be good guys. They took us to the field kitchen and fed us to our heart's content. 4 ladles each. Pea soup is the best. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Major, it's a poem. Then they said to us, 2 can come back. We drew lots, me and Wilhelm. But to tell you the truth, I wish I'd stayed there. We were about to leave, and then an elderly Russian with glasses came up to us and said in German, well, it is only called that in German, but we understood him. Come on, everyone, there is enough food. And he gave us bread for the road, and we smoked 2. Wilhelm smoked 3, and I smoked 2 cigarettes. Both could say nothing about the Russians' preparations for the attack. Obviously, they didn't notice anything. And that they brought bread. That's great. Anyway, we won't have long to wait for the consequences. During the night, everything shakes with a rumble. Around midnight, Russian tanks burst into our neighbourhood, continuously rumbling on the sidewalk tracks. Not a single anti-tank gun, not a single German gun does not interfere with the T-34s walking along. Planted on the armour machine, gunners jump off, fight in our location and knock our soldiers out of individual houses. In a few minutes destroy command posts and entire headquarters, which just a short time ago felt completely safe. The firing is going on at Hunting Park too. Among the ruins appear the figures of Russian soldiers in white camouflage coats. They sneak from wall to wall and try to seize the exits from the cellars with lightning-fast throws. But we desperately resist. We are afraid of captivity. Or, to be more precise, the moment when we will have to raise our hands. It seems incomprehensible to me, and I'm sure my family, even my wife, wouldn't understand it either. But it is. It can only be understood by those who fought in Stalingrad from the very beginning, who saw how houses and factories were still standing here and the streets were almost intact. What can we expect from the Russians after what we have done here? Their exasperation will be enormous, doubly enormous, because the destruction of the city has continued during the last weeks, when our fate was already decided. This exasperation will also be enormous because it is the last few days that have brought them great losses. We will raise our hands, and at first they will think we want to throw grenades again. How will they feel about us? At the 14th Tank Corps everything went well. We saw that. But whether it will always be like that and what will happen to us afterwards, nobody knows. All this is covered by the darkness of the unknown. That's why I can't make up my mind. That's why I keep postponing this step. The result of the night fighting is a lot of casualties. The dead lie on the stairs. The wounded are carried to the sanitary cellars. Even in front, where the tanks have just passed and where there was no battle at all, new gaps are also gaping. But there are no dead or wounded here. There are no soldiers here at all. They defected to the Russians under cover of darkness, and not without the influence of our yesterday's reconnaissance team and Russian bread. This night has shown that the defence must be organised more clearly. Therefore, Hunting Park we divided into 2 zones. Major Linden takes command of the right wing, I, the left. Immediately, in the first morning hours, we begin to build new barricades and equip embrasures on the upper floors. Today is January 30th, a holiday of National Socialist Germany. 10 years since Hitler came to power, enough reason to shower honours on the zealous followers of the Nazi regime. Paulus produced in the rank of General Field Marshal, not lagging behind in this matter and the command of the army. In these days, when the water already truly comes to the very throat, it finds nothing more important than to engage in ranks, awards, and the like. Entire boxes of orders are being emptied, rain, knights, and German crosses poured on, deserving and undeserving. Officers of the army staff and other staffs who have fought only a few months receive high honours, to which all instructions are not entitled. They are promoted to ranks and positions that, God knows, are unacceptable even in this situation. Generals are born into the light of God, having such a long service, which before would not have been enough, perhaps, for the rank of captain. But only they can't give vacations to the homeland, and even those who are not entitled to them would get them. Apparently the command said to itself, We will distribute awards and ranks with both hands anyway. The lucky ones are of little use. And meanwhile, there are still such officers who consider these awards and promotions deserved and are proud of them. Around noon, on the radio broadcast Goering's speech. In a neighbouring cellar, where there was still a serviceable receiver, the soldiers, who were free from service, were listening to the loudspeaker. Some still haven't given up hope. They still believe Hitler's promise to rescue us. "You can rely on me like a rock," was then broadcast to all soldiers and officers. The incorrigibles cling to this promise. The Führer will not leave us sitting here. Today Goering will tell us everything as it is. And someone who has already mentally said goodbye to life also lights up a faint hope. A voice from the loudspeaker broadcasts about the people's community and the people's army. All these are catchphrases that we have heard thousands of times. They are quite well known to us. Hitler is called the greatest German. Then Goering declares, "The enemy is tough, but the German soldier has become even tougher." Come here, I want to shout in the face of this phraser. Come and see for yourself the soldiers who have become even harder. Here they lie in cellars and snow pits, barely able to move. Horse meat soup, and that once a day. That's all their strength. And Goering won't stop. Above all gigantic battles stands like a huge monument Stalingrad, the battle for Stalingrad. This is the greatest heroic battle of all that our history has ever known. He means us. High words, but they make us neither hot nor cold. They are highly suspicious. That's what a priest says at an open grave. Then, too, the dead man is made into a heroic god. But it doesn't make him feel any better. Goering rants about how in battle the generals and soldiers stood together shoulder to shoulder, spreads about the heroic battle of the Nibelungs. They, too, stood to the last. OK, the verdict has been pronounced. We are definitively written off. Goes through my head. Written off once and for all. We have been sacrificed, despite Hitler's promise. Even today, they're already making money off our deaths. Here, see how these heroes stand, avenge them, fight with the same fierceness. Goering lays it out unabashedly. Let everyone who feels weakness in himself remember the soldiers of Stalingrad. Turn off the box, shouts Fricker. Shut it up. Or maybe you want to listen to a eulogy to yourself. It's good for the fat man to talk. He's sitting in Berlin, and we're dying here. Turn it off! Turn it off! No, naughty, we want to listen, someone yells. A terrible noise rises. Then at last there is silence again. Now it's Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. Goering spares no words in describing our heroism, and deftly makes the transition to our fate. The time will come, and they will say, "O traveller, when you come to Germany, tell about us, about those who fell in Stalingrad, as the law commanded us." Let me go, I can't listen to this, shouts an elderly sergeant. He pushes his neighbour away, makes his way to the receiver. A short blow with the butt of his rifle. Everything happens lightning fast. No one has time to hold him back, and the receiver is nothing but rubble. Coils and lamps are lying on the floor, 6, 7 boots crushing them into small pieces. The voice is silent. I am silent. I think it is the right thing to do. Mr. Major, the Russians. Near us are already capitulating. That's Baseman's voice. He's not mistaken. Alarm! I shout loudly. 2 liaisons chase everyone out of the cellar. I run up the stairs. Tony and Glock follow me. Upstairs, in front of the building, the tanks are again fanning the area. Sheaves of shells are flying along the street. All the exits are under fire. Ricochets whistle overhead. But I need to know what's happening here. The quickest way to get into position is to run through the big gate. A jump and I'm already outside, running as hard as I can along the wall, with bursts to my right and left, my helmet pulling down over my eyes. Another 10 metres, 2 more, now hurry around the corner, again in the gate, and a deafening blow on the back of my head rolls me off my feet. I fall into the snow. A broad-shouldered Red Army soldier bent over me. I look into the muzzle of the machine gun. "Come on!" he shouts, and with a gesture of an order points to the right. I turn my head. There, one by one, German soldiers with raised arms and no weapons are coming out of the cellar. 30 paces further on, a column of 4 rows is already forming. Lyndon also stands in line. I stand next to him. We shake hands. Then he briefly tells me how it all happened. The T-34s came out of the blue. The posts at the entrance were powerless. Hand grenades flew into the cellar. The result was terrible. To avoid further bloodshed, says Lyndon, I immediately capitulated. Incredibly slow stretches our column of prisoners of war through the endless ruins of the city on the great river, silent and faceless. Hunger and blood, hell and cruelty, madness and betrayal are behind us. We don't know what lies ahead. We wander, devastated, infinitely tired, exhausted, finished. We can't hear a word, our heads are drooping, we can't think, and why should we? Everything is in vain, death is meaningless, life is meaningless. I wish I had died then in shop number 4. Are you Oberleutnant? A Russian non-commissioned officer appears in front of me, shaking me by my overcoat. What does he want from me? Oberleutnant? He repeats his question. No, Major. Ah, Major, you're a major, Major. And I already feel him grabbing me, dragging me, pushing me, shouting something fiercely at me, swinging at me, threatening me with his raised fist. But then I hear another loud voice. Someone is holding his arm, pushing him aside. A young lieutenant claps me on the shoulder. Mr. Major, I'm sorry, our men are gut. But here in Stalingrad there are a lot of dead, a lot of blood. You understand? Don't take offence. Follow me. The lieutenant stops the whole column and leads me forward. With a sigh of relief, I follow him. I hear him talking to the head of the column. Then he turns to me. The comrade will look after you. Nothing will happen to you, and then the war will be kaput. Hitler's kaput. You'll come home. And he shakes my hand. The basement of the department store is full of soldiers. They sit along the walls, pressed closely together, as if fused together, leaving a gap for the door. It's the same picture on the other wall. Meanwhile, in the semi-darkness, there is intense staff activity. Scribes and radio operators with documents in their hands are running, tripping over outstretched legs and things lying around, knocking on doors, opening and closing them, running back, colliding with new liaisons. The brain of the dying body is still functioning. The news of the final collapse of the southern front of the cauldron causes great confusion. While we, who were defending this section, have already left the city under a convoy of Russian soldiers, the Chief of Staff of the Sixth Army, Lieutenant General Schmidt, orders to eliminate the breakthrough. Hastily composed combat groups are thrown forward. Even their names are unknown. They must at any cost to prevent further advance of the Russians through the hunting park. I don't see it all anymore. The true picture of the last hours in the cellar of Field Marshal Paulus was drawn to me by Major Doberkow, whom I met 3 days later in captivity in Krasnoarmysk. And Captain Markgraf from the anti-tank division told me about the northern cauldron, German soldier in Stalingrad, a contradictory phenomenon. On the one hand, he is aware of the hopelessness of his situation, and on the other, fiercely fighting for the last pile of ruins. At 11 o'clock in the morning, he curses the command and the Führer, breaks the radio, not wanting to listen to the speech of Reichsmarschall Göring, and at 12 o'clock, again stretches his arms at the seams, when he is driven to death, says "Jawohl," and obeys. The last days of the German army in Stalingrad are truly tragic. Seeing before them a saving island, bread, medicines, rest, and all this in such an achievable proximity, the German soldiers, accustomed not thinking to say "Jawohl," through the cold, through the deprivation of many days and nights, blindly step towards their own death. Soldierly obedience has become part of their flesh and blood. They understand by it unconditional obedience, immediately, without leaving their seats, without thinking. They have long ago lost such soldierly virtues as reasonable courage, nobility, the concept of honour and dignity, respect for life. A soldier no longer has to think, he is obliged only to obey, to be courageous and brave, loyal to the last minute, without asking for what and for what. All those who stand here and fight, they are all only servants of their master, automatons that perform mechanical actions when a coin is dropped into them. Only on the basis of this upbringing has it become at all possible that the resistance still continues, that thousands of soldiers are still needlessly dying at the last minute. This is how the spring that has been wound up for years is unwound. In the room of the Chief of Communications of the Army reigns confusion. Around Colonel Van Hooven seated about 20 officers. Here is an elderly major who had been commandant of headquarters somewhere. Now he is reading the New Testament with reverence. Beside him, a young artillery captain is rummaging through his belongings. He empties his wallet and clipboard, then goes to the iron stove in the middle of the room, throws into it everything that he no longer needs, a soldier's book, letters, photographs, and money. In the corner by the basement window stand 3 Oberleutnants. They are leaning over a map, which one of them is holding, and talking about the so-called evacuation points. The thing is that the High Command of the Wehrmacht sent a radiogram a week ago. Those who want to break through will be assisted. The aviation was instructed to regularly fly over certain points between the Volga and the front line and drop food, and spotted groups of German soldiers to take on board and transport to the rear. The nearest such designated point was 30 kilometers southwest near Kotelnikovo and was called Novi Put. It could have been reached by many. But the Army Command, afraid to lose the last fighting forces, hid this order. Only a few officers of higher headquarters know about it. Now they expect to seize this chance to get out of the cauldron. A variety of proposals are made. One suggests using a captured T-34 tank, quite fueled. It stands in a neighbouring yard. Another thinks that it is necessary to try to break through the front line at night by cars, blinding the enemy with the light of searchlights. A third is in favour of fleeing on foot. Someone else suggests entrenching in the ruins, to wait out the surrender in the underground, and when the big wave of Russians will subside, to break through. All these younger officers are discussing the 10th or 20th step, not realizing that they will stumble and fall into the abyss at the very first one. It is impossible to understand why these lieutenants can manage their time so independently and freely. Front officers are ordered, as before, to hold their positions and stay with their soldiers, because any attempt to break through with or without permission in groups or clusters, even the very thought of it would have a demoralizing effect on the troops. But for themselves, the staffs have a different yardstick. All the uninvited guests and officers who are now in the Army headquarters, discussing the possibility of getting out, in fact already summarize the sad conclusion of the chapter Stalingrad. It is useless and transferred to the cauldron on airplanes vacationers, especially officers. They are already enough. In addition, there are many headquarters without troops, and they are looking for and find every use. However, some headquarters managed to get out by airplanes. They dragged with them absolutely unthinkable things, such as cases of alcoholic beverages. Was it not more important to capture the wounded? Those who are gathered here are completely confused, confounded, and no longer understand anything, for everything that is happening around them is happening against common sense and reason. All that they had hitherto revered and honoured, approved of, taught and inculcated in their soldiers, has disappeared. The wheel of history is moving forward. It has run over them. Many of the officers are in favour of ending it. We must save those who are still alive. Germany still needs use, is their slogan. They have enough courage for self-sacrifice. They have proved it enough. Every one of them has become a common infantryman here. Every one has fired a shot, and seldom when anyone has shown personal cowardice. But can now an army commander with a clear conscience still demand that the order to hold out be obeyed? Colonel Van Hooven speaks to the Chief of Operations of the Army Staff, asks him whether the Field Marshal really knows about the state of the last soldiers, about the hopeless situation of the wounded. He confirms and reiterates that nevertheless We must fight to the last. But what else can benefit the command of the Wehrmacht these last hours, worth streams of blood? Merde, exclaimed Marshal Cambronne, and put his sabre into its scabbard. When, at the Battle of Waterloo, after the last attempt of Napoleon's old Guard battalions to regain the position, a concentric attack by the British and Prussians caused the still unshaken carriage to tremble. The officers of the Sixth Army often had that old soldier's swear word tumbling from their lips, and with good reason. But today, January 30th, there are no longer strong enough words and curses to express all the indignation at what the order still demanded. Hours have passed, evening has come, the officers sit around the burning candle. There are only 4 centimetres left in it, and it is the last one. Soon darkness will fall. Colonel Van Hooven has returned from a meeting with the army commander and has brought a pack of cigarettes. Everyone smokes one at a time. The bursts of heavy shells shake the thick walls of the cellar. The young artillery captain nervously taps his hand on the table, shifts his gaze from one face to another. The look is questioning and unsure, as if the captain is looking for support. Then he can't stand it. "Mr. Colonel, let me ask you a question. What will you do when the Russians appear?" The Chief of Communications of the army calmly looks at him. The answer sounds clear and precise. "Surrender as a prisoner." The captain flinches, cannot hide his amazement. He looks at the colonel, at his wicker epaulettes with 2 gold stars, shakes his head. "Mr. Colonel, you can't. We officers can't go back to our homeland alone and tell the German people. Your sons were left lying in Stalingrad, and we are the only ones who stayed alive, who were saved when they had already fallen." "And yet we can." Van Hooven raises his voice. "The percentage of dead officers is the same as soldiers. No one can blame us for that. Not only can we return to Germany, we must. It is we who are called upon to tell the motherland the truth. I went through the First World War. I lived through that horror twice. Now it's enough. It must never happen again. Mr. Colonel, but we all didn't want war. Or maybe you did." "No, we all didn't. But when the time of great success came, we were all eager to keep up. Until we ended up in this basement, you have to admit that. The captain's not giving up. He's finally found a senior officer who's answering his questions. That's what mood processing accomplishes. Call it mood management, whatever you want. Propaganda, education, that's what got us this far. But all this is only possible in a state where the Führer's principle reigns supreme. We all have our own common sense. We can talk about it today, so why didn't we do it before? Democracy is what we need. The others listen attentively, but do not enter into the conversation. Just listening. How do you envision this? It's already like an interview, but we'll have to have a serious talk about that after the war. Here, in this basement, I can't give you any prescription. Mr. Colonel, do you think they'll listen to our voices after the war? It won't be easy, I admit, but it won't be unsuccessful. I've been thinking about it a lot these last few days, and I see the future in front of me. If it comes to fruition, the terrible sacrifices we have made will not be in vain. The deaths of our comrades here in Stalingrad will then acquire a deep meaning. Reasonable words are sounding. The connection of events is becoming clearer. The first glimmers of realization are appearing in our minds. The enemy's onslaught is intensifying. He, from all sides, attacks exhausted German troops. There are reports from the aviation barracks, from the railroad embankment, from positions in the southern part of the city. All of them say that the end is galloping closer. In a few hours, the Russian infantry will be already at the entrance to the department store, and Paulus, if he is faithful to his own orders to the end, will only have to take up the rifle himself. But he doesn't seem to want to. Late in the evening, Paulus calls a meeting where the final decision will be made. The commander is said to be planning a last-minute armed sortie, which should bring him death at the head of his officers. Field Marshal, an example for his subordinates with a grenade in his hand on the cover of an illustrated magazine and the caption under the photo. He fell for the Führer, the people and the Reich. Oh yes, this is what the headquarters wants. This is what is needed to crown the song of the new Nibelungs with a worthy ending. And the commander of the army ponders whether he too should go to the end of the road, strewn with grave crosses and corpses of hundreds of thousands of those who died under the high order at the walls of the city and in the city itself, while in the farthest corner of the cellar they are arguing about the best way to stage the last scene of this greatest German tragedy, while outside the Red Army is capturing block after block in close combat. Sporadic shots are heard under the vaults of the dungeon. It is the officers' and soldiers' nerves failing. They cannot imagine what will happen to them. They do not want to take a step into this unknown. They are afraid, and people who yesterday, figuratively speaking, walked barefoot through the underworld, choose the shortest way out of this hopeless horror, a bullet. But sometimes there is not enough ammunition even for that. That's why they start to gather in groups, acting in concert. In one of the darker cellars, the sapper platoon of the 191st Infantry Regiment gathered, joined by a military judge and a divisional veterinarian. The remaining ammunition is brought down to one place. The men sit down on minis and charges, rummaging through their wallets one last time, pulling out photographs with trembling hands. They look at the faces of their wives and the wide-open eyes of their children. The platoon commander has no time for that. He adjusts the Bickford cord, checks it. It's all right. Attaches the cord to the inductive blasting machine, winds the spring with a four-cornered wrench. He looks around at everyone. Done, he says. A second, and outside the retreating infantrymen rush to the ground near the huge crater. The railroad guns rumbled, they say to each other. An unprecedented caliber, thank God we weren't blown apart. And the next wave of retreating men are already using the crater as a favourable shelter. The deaths of some push back the deaths of others, and the battle continues, rolling closer and closer to the department store, to the German field marshal. Meanwhile, Paulus decides to surrender as a prisoner. At the last moment he crosses out Hitler's calculations with a bold line, although he knows that at the moment he needs the dead field marshal, who found his death together with his soldiers. But Paulus no longer wants to enter the textbooks of German history with a marshal's baton in his right hand and with orders on the proudly protruding chest. He does not want that in the Berlin Sportpalast cry. Avenge for Stalingrad. Avenge the fallen field marshal. No, he wants to share the fate of his still surviving soldiers. That's how he now understands the duty of an army commander. The ring is tightening tighter and tighter. The Russians seize one divisional infirmary after another. A continuous stream of wounded flows to Red Square, and especially to the house on which hangs a flag with a red cross. On each bed, 2 and 3, but the flow does not diminish, and everyone needs help. The dead are carried out the door, and when the orderlies return with empty stretchers, there are already 2 seriously wounded where one had been placed. The moans and screams grow louder by the hour. This is the limit of human suffering. The world history has never known such a thing. The night sky rises over these Cannae, over the Germanic Cannaes by the great Russian river, and the descendant of Emilius Paulus sits on his camp bunk. He thinks of the soldierly virtues of loyalty and obedience, and what a heavy cross they have laid on the rest of his life. Around 9 p.m., the first Russian tanks burst into Red Square. 12 officers of the 194th Regiment line up at the exit from the cellar. This is the Field Marshal's personal guard. Major General Roske gives the password, Horst Wessel. The only thing missing, perhaps, trumpeters to play the national anthem, so that the scene looked quite Russian. Downstairs in the basement, Paulus gives the last radiogram to his Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Russian tanks in front of the entrance. This is the end of the 6th Army. The 6th Army has faithfully fulfilled its oath, fought to the last man and the last cartridge. Paulus, Field Marshal General. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Hitler's farewell order is accepted. He praises the actions of the army. It will go down in history. But the end of the radiogram is completely unclear. Despite everything, saved us the 6th Army. You're Hitler. The order is registered. The radios go silent. Now the word belongs to the Red Army. Around 3 a.m. at the entrance to the department store, the first Russians, their captains. They are sent back, asking for officers of higher rank. After a while, a lieutenant colonel appears. He is escorted to Roska. The talks are brief. They end with a wish that the Russian general arrives. That Paulus himself is in the basement is not mentioned. Meanwhile, 12 officers are still standing upstairs, not allowing anyone inside the cellar. 2 meters away from them, Red Army soldiers are patrolling. No one behaves like in battle anymore. No one thinks of shooting, jumping up, running, looking for shelter. Soviet soldiers feel on the Red Square of Stalingrad as on the main square of their hometown somewhere in the rear. In vast Russia, in Siberia, in Turkmenistan, where they came on vacation. Among them there were many officers in good uniforms, fur coats, cotton pants, felt boots, faces scorched by the fire of battles. They are smoking, talking to each other, and next to the German soldiers. One can feel some kind of discharge. The night passes quietly. Sometimes, very rarely, a shot will ring out somewhere. It is difficult to determine what kind of shot it is, whether in some God-forsaken corner, where they still do not know about what is happening, the resistance has resumed, whether it is the notorious last cartridge or whether it is suicide. Between 6 and 7 a.m., a Russian major general arrives. The German major escorts him to the commander of the southern mouth of the cauldron. That, together with the officers of his staff, is seated at a round table. And aside, on the edge of the bunk, resting his elbows on his knees, lowering his head, sits another man, Lieutenant General Schmidt. As soon as the negotiations begin, the Russians are immediately informed. The army commander is also in the basement of the department store. Therefore, the German command agrees to capitulate only on one condition. Russian soldiers will enter the cellar only after Paulus leaves it. The Russian general immediately gives his consent. Since on behalf of the German command negotiates one Roska, the Russians pay attention to the inexplicable presence of the Chief of Staff of the army. When asked what he is doing here, Schmidt replies that he is present only as an observer from the army commander. He has nothing more to say. His role is over. This man, whose ruthless orders drove tens of thousands of soldiers to their death, is now unrecognizable. Restrained, obedient, submissive, one might even say, fearful, he now waits for the end. Known for his cruelty, threats, terror, he has now turned into a man standing on the sidelines, a beggar, waiting for favour, a handout which will be thrown to him by the magnanimity of the enemy. The Russian general is accompanied by 2 lieutenant colonels. The younger one, the commander of a tank regiment, says that he took part in the breakthrough of the front of the Italian army at Milarovo. They advanced 50 kilometres on the first day. There is a turn in the war. Germany begins to roll under the mountain. This is the impression of the German officers listening to his words. The second lieutenant colonel is an interpreter. The conversation is conducted politely. Not a single angry word, not a single rude word, which the German officers feared. No threats. Everything happens as it should, clearly, correctly. Polite expressions are exchanged. The Russians are treated to the last cigarettes intended for receptions. The winners smile, take out of their pockets whole packs of the best German cigarettes and put them on the table. These cigarettes were kindly dropped to them by German transport planes. In addition, they treat them to oranges. Roske responds with glucose. They make a quick deal. German officers and soldiers can keep their belongings with them. They are guaranteed their lives and return home after the war. Toward the end, Roske dictates the last order. The Russian officers nod their heads. They do not object. In the room where the radio is located, there is excitement. The head of the operations department runs in. He orders, "Destroy everything." The order is immediately carried out. Axes and hammers smash the transmitter, receiver, cipher machines. burn the documentation. Everything turns into tabula rasa. When the communications chief of the 62nd Russian Army enters the room, all he finds is wreckage. Pale as chalk, he silently slams the door shut. 2 minutes later, a German-speaking Russian officer appears. He has only one question. When is all this destroyed? The head of the radio Oberleutnant tries to answer something, stutters, mumbles. Everything is clear. The indignation of the Russians is understandable, because during the negotiations it was clearly agreed to surrender everything as it is. At about 10 a.m., a limousine arrives at the department store. German soldiers take heavy suitcases out of the basement and put them in the trunk. A tall man approaches the open door from the cellar. He walks, slightly leaning forward. His face is yellow and sluggish. The visor of his cap is pulled low over his eyes. This is Paulus. He casts oblique glances at those standing on the sides, at the still smoking ruins, then sits down in the car. Next to his field marshal, chief of staff, chief of operations, and chief of officers' department. Devastated, drooping and indifferent, they rush past the dead of the last hours, through mountains of corpses and ruins into captivity, under the protection of Russian bayonets from the beginning to realize the truth of the soldiers who were betrayed. At Roski's headquarters, silence now ensues. Issuing the 48 remaining sausages to the wounded is the last act of service of this commander. After the strain of the last night and day, the former commander of the Southern Cauldron lies down and falls asleep. When the time comes, he will be awakened. He is the rear guard of the army that came out to win and move to the east, and is now marching there, but only much farther than he wanted to go, to the barracks behind barbed wire. Somewhere in the basements of the department store, the last belongings are being gathered. Officers and soldiers bent over satchels, a few shirts and towels, a watch, a pocket knife, a knitted vest, a pot and spoon and socks, that's all. Boxes and suitcases full of uniforms, underwear, boots were left behind. In the convoy, in the nursery and gumrak, fell into the hands of the Red Army, and with the loss of them long ago had to be reconciled. Now it is important to have at least the essentials for the first time of captivity. But much is lacking. The young artillery captain has a rolled-up blanket on his right shoulder. He has nothing else. His helmet and pistol left in the cellar, he now walks slowly under the vaulted ceiling toward the exit. Down the long corridor he makes his way between the grey, shadow-like men who want, if only for a moment longer, to delay the moment of their final surrender. It is hard for him to walk. Hunger and fatigue do not press with such force as the uncertainty of the future, as the thought that you have to go a long, long way. But the worst of it all is the consciousness from which there is no escape, the consciousness that one man abused the faith and trust of his best soldiers until the enemy seized the last corner of the last cellar of this vast city. The feeling that the soldiers had been betrayed was now a realized fact. In the brain and in the heart, which had only just been agonizingly devastated, there is now growing opposition. Yes, many Germans will have their eyes opened now. Harsh reality will take care of that. The march to the east is blocked. It has ended in mass death of German soldiers. The flickering flame of the smokes illuminates the space of only a few meters. Tired feet tread slowly. Over boards, knapsacks, pistols, crates, radios and glass shards trampled on the floor through dirty, thawed snow. Officers and soldiers stride toward the exit over charters. Hitler speeches and Goebbels articles from the regimental library lying underfoot. The crates under it have long since been burned for fuel, and the literature has crumbled. It is trampled with dirty, soaked boots. Closer to the exit, it gets brighter. Up there, the barrier bifurcates, leaving a narrow corridor through which people in tattered grey-green overcoats come out into the light of day, like ghosts of a long gone time. The ascent leading out of the cellar is so trampled over the hours, so slippery, that it is impossible to get out without help. Arms are stretched out toward the artillery captain. Two Red Army soldiers standing on his right and left help him good-naturedly to climb up towards the clear day. The daylight cuts his eyes, accustomed to the semi-darkness of the cellar. He can hardly distinguish the groups of Russian officers and red-cheeked soldiers standing around and talking among themselves. A few steps away from him, German officers and soldiers from the southern cauldron are forming a front to the east to begin their march into captivity. The captain stands beside them. The fighting is ending in the northern cauldron as well. German troops are squeezed into a small space. Practically it is only the tractor plant with its workshops and remnants of buildings, with sheet-rolling shop and foundry. Here is defended by Colonel General Strecker. As in the southern section, lack of ammunition, hunger, frost and lice undermine the strength of the last German resistance. The commanders of the units have rejected the Corps Command's order to conduct attacks on January 31st and February 1st to level the front line. They are no longer able to make any progress with bleeding units. The official meeting cannot change anything either. The Corps Commander admits the impossibility of offensive action, but insists on further defence and especially forbids any AWOL actions. February 2nd, at dawn on the front line is already rumbling anti-tank guns and mortars. The sun rises, and an observer from the roof of the workshop firmly establishes that on the left, in front of the positions of the 26th Motorized Infantry Regiment, without a single shot, Russian columns are building up. Units of Russian infantry in almost close combat formation are advancing into a gully running at an angle to the front line about 200 metres from the German positions. Other Russian companies accumulate and form up on the heights west of Spartakovka. The bulk of the Russian tanks, anti-tank guns and artillery are at this point still standing quite peacefully, but pointing threateningly toward the cauldron. There is no movement on the German side. The mortars and artillery still fired their last ammunition yesterday. The positions of the 11th Corps are defenceless against the Russian regiments. In order not to put the last soldiers under fire from the Russian guns, the commanders themselves, without orders from above, throw away the white flags, surrendering one by one. By noon, the last group throws down their weapons. The generals had surrendered shortly before. The curtain falls, while endless columns of prisoners are dragging their last strength across the snow-covered steppe, while tens of thousands of wounded, unable to move, wait for rescue in the cold pits of cellars, while more than 100,000 dead soldiers lie in the ruins, unburied, stiff, covered with snow, and a rifle with an empty magazine lying nearby. The motherland is anxiously, with a sinking heart, listening to the loudspeakers. It is full of fear for fathers, husbands, and sons. On February 3rd, all flags in Germany are lowered. The announcer reads the message of the Wehrmacht High Command. The battle at Stalingrad is over. True to its oath to the last breath, the 6th Army, under the exemplary command of General Field Marshal Paulus, fell in the face of superior enemy forces and unfavourable circumstances. Under the swastika flag, mounted on the highest ruin of Stalingrad, the last battle was fought. Generals, officers, non-commissioned officers and privates fought shoulder to the last cartridge. They died so that Germany might live. Their example will be preserved for eternity. This is the message of the Wehrmacht High Command. The whole German people are listening to it. Many believe it because the leadership of the German Empire knows how to pass off military disasters as successes and put a band-aid of heroism on bleeding wounds, because no one in Germany knows what tragedy really played out east of the Don Steppes. Yes, from the ruins and surviving facades of the houses, from the empty eye sockets of the windows' flags hung down to the ground, black streaks of smoke and cinders, flames soared into the sky. But where the last shot was fired, the last bullet, where the volleys of Russian rocket mortars crushed the last resistance, there was no waving flag with swastika, there was no Sieg Heil, and whoever claims that there was is lying.